kick off today, one of the most amazing worthy people who we love so much and are so excited to hear from today, Miss Wendy Slaby is coming, and you are going to be knocked down with the love of Jesus coming out of her today with her amazing story of God's love.
Okay, I would like to first, there's a couple things I actually forgot last time while I was speaking. Not surprising. I didn't actually tell you all of my conditions. Most of you see that I have trouble walking. I have what's called spastic quadriplegia, cerebral palsy. This means that it affects my entire body from head to toe. And it's mostly a muscle condition. My muscles are very tight. It's very easy to accidentally bruise me because of that. And from what my mom said, I actually have 2 brain injuries, not just one. They think one of them happened before I was born and one happened soon after. Going from there, I also have a genetic eye disorder that is part of facial muscular dystrophy. I was born without eye muscles that control rolling your eyes, opening your eyes. The muscles that control the lens are there, thank God, although they don't work great either, but they're there. And I also had pancake eyelids, which means my eyelids had no creases in them, so even if my muscles worked, my eyes couldn't open. So that's to that part of me. I also have a scoliosis from about my rib cage down to my tailbone. I have a malformed pelvis. They think that was genetic, but they're not entirely sure. And I also have a right angle club foot that is atypical. Usually a club foot is kind of, it's not angled the same way as mine. Mine is actually angled so I can actually walk. A lot of people with club feet have to have surgery to have them fixed so they can actually stand. They considered loosening the tendons in the back of my ankle to make my foot so it would flex, but then when they realized it was a club foot, they decided, no, because then we might have to amputate it. That wouldn't be great. So those are all of the conditions that I work with on a daily basis. When it rains, the spasticity is worse. That's fun. And overall, right now, it's not terribly uncomfortable, but as a child, it was awful. When your body's trying to grow and your muscles are too tight to let your bones actually move, it was very painful. So I figured we'd start with that, and then we're going to go through my pictures, because last time I forgot to continue with the pictures because I'm actually visually impaired, and I forgot they were there. Yeah, that's a fun trick. So we're starting with, this is when I was 2 weeks old. I was born at 28 weeks gestation, and we'll get into more of that later. This is when I was 2 weeks old and weighed 3 pounds, 4 ounces, and was 16 inches long. And my dad says I was actually breathing on my own in this picture because I was awake. And then this one is my mom holding me for the first time. She actually had an infection before I was born, and she had to be cleared of the infection before she could meet me. I was 2.5 weeks old in that picture. This is my brother who's standing, and that's me in my bassinet. I was an unusual child in that I didn't have a security blanket. I had a security bassinet. This one is when I was a year old. My brother's sitting next to me because he didn't let baby do anything that he didn't get to do too. And that was where my parents celebrated that I sat up on my own for the first time. What is this one? Oh, this is kind of funny. I was raised in an all-white town, but my doctors were in Syracuse, which had a fairly large African-American population. And this year, my parents asked me, "What do you want for Christmas?" And I said, "I want a beautiful baby like we see in Syracuse." I just wanted my beautiful baby, and I got my beautiful baby. So her name was Beautiful. This is when I was 4. If you look at my hands, you can see they're still spastic there. They're not now. And please excuse the clothes. That was the first time I tried to dress myself, and my mom left it because she thought it was so cute. This was the summer I got the first pair of armband crutches. It was just before I went into kindergarten. One of our family friends took the picture because she also had a son with cerebral palsy, who she was so excited that I was able to walk on these crutches even through the woods. You know, I was darn determined, if nothing else. And this is when I was in first grade, I think, maybe second. It's just to show a progression of how I grew. You can also see the facial features of the eye disorder in some of them. This is sixth grade. Honest to God, my hair was not permed. That happened with puberty. My hair decided to curl. This is a picture from when I worked at a camp. And this was one of our co-leaders next to me named James. Everybody else was swimming, and I was like, I am not getting in that water. It's way too cold. But that summer was a very big point in my life where, you know, God just said, hey, you have all this stuff, but I'm going to change it. And I said, okay, I guess we're going forward. I was a teacher. You see this little girl in the red? That is my Hannah. My Hannah is now 21 years old and studying to be a lawyer. I got her when she was 6, and she was also one of our sickest students with asthma. Like, every day I had to give her medicine. And our school was unique in that the young lady on the other side of her, that's not me, is Jessica. And Jessica is 3 feet 3 inches tall. She is a dwarf. So there was me, Jessica, and my friend Anna, who taught at the school that year. And, you know, we had people come in and say, where are the teachers? We are. So we can keep, I don't know what's next. Oh, this is my first date with Justin. I was standing on a chair. And yes, I made that dress. Keep going. And this is our official engagement picture. His mom was hiding around the corner when he gave me the ring. He recreated the night that we professed our love to each other. He pulled me into his lap. Because the first night I fell into his lap. Yeah, God has a sense of humor. And so this is the actual picture where I got the ring. It's still there today. And then this is our wedding day. And this was the picture where I was so sick of pictures. I said, oh, yummy, flowers. And my photographer caught me just at the right point. I made that dress too, and the veil, and the flower arrangement. And this is our wedding party. We did a medieval-themed wedding. I made my husband's doublet, his best man's doublet, my dress, and our mothers were kind enough to make the other men's outfits. The ladies' dresses, thank God, I was able to find online because we had people from 4 different states to work with. So this was a day that nobody thought would happen, but it did. This is when I have a graduate degree in education. This is the day I was inducted into the International Educators Honor Society. This man that's standing there giving me the award is apologizing because when they do these kinds of things at Potsdam State University in New York, they have you stand when they call the first letter of your last name. He couldn't see that I was still standing. So my boyfriend at the time snuck up behind him and said, you missed one, but you can't see her. She's tiny. And he went down through his list again and found me. And he was apologizing to me for this because he was actually one of the first people to meet me on campus. And he was worried about how I would handle college life because SUNY Potsdam is in the frozen tundra of New York. I mean, it is cold, and there's a lot of ice. So he was profusely apologizing, and I'm like, it's okay, I'm used to this. So that was one of my proud days where I got to do that. And the only person who can probably read this is Bruce. This is my French degree for being able to speak fluently to the B2 level in French. Now, the B2 level is, it's a European Union designation, which says you're functionally fluent. Which means, no, I can't sit there and write a doctoral essay, but I can speak to you, I can get what I need, and I can function in French. And that is a big part of my recent story, and we'll talk about more of that later. So, my title is, What Does God Have to Say About That? Do you believe that miracles happen today? I believe fully that miracles happen today. I was born at 28 weeks gestation. My mother had an infection the entire time she was pregnant. They didn't know where the infection was until after I was born. She went to the doctor's the day before complaining of a very bad backache. The doctor blew her off. So it probably was part of the doctor's fault. But anyway, so as I was being born, the doctor kept trying to prepare my mother. She may not survive. This is really unusual. She kept saying things like, it might be a miscarriage, it might be a stillborn. And I, questioned my mom quite a bit about this. And I said, why would they do that? That's awful. They weren't giving her any encouragement at all that I would survive. And she's like, well, at 28 weeks, and during that time, babies typically, if they were born before the 26-week mark, were considered a miscarriage. So the fact that I made it to just 28 weeks was pretty impressive. And then, so the doctor basically said, if she comes out making noise, we'll make efforts to save her, but if not, I came out screaming. At least the best I could with little tiny lungs. And I never understood this part of my story, very well. They also had trouble with the incubator. Didn't work. It blew cold air for 5 hours before they noticed. And then they sent for an ambulance from another town because my town was a town of 300 people. We had one little hospital for the entire county. And they didn't have the facilities to take care of me. So they sent for an ambulance. The ambulance ran out of gas on the way to get me. Really, so I didn't understand for the longest time why on earth God would let such a thing happen. But I learned at that camp. First of all, the verse that comes to mind for this is James 5:16. Confess your trespasses one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective and fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. So years went by, and it's like, why on earth did I have such a crazy beginning? Well, at this camp, I was required to retake my first aid and CPR certification to be able to be a camp counselor. So we walk in, we all have to take this in order to have the kids come. So I walk in, and the guy's doing roll call, and he gets to my name, Hershey, which is my maiden name. And he's like, all right, I have to ask. And I said, oh no, what is going on? Am I not allowed to be here because of disability, or what's going on? And he's like, do you know of a baby that was born in, the fall of 1977 that was severely premature that had to go to Syracuse? And I looked at him and said, I'm her. And he's like, do you realize the miracle you are? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm here. And he says, Wendy, he's like, he looked out, this is the only time he used my name. The rest of the day I was baby girl. But he's like, Wendy, I was on that call that night. He's like, I was newly certified with ALS certification, which is airway life support. And we obviously had to provide our crew, even though they provided the ambulance that had the equipment for you. And he said, I could not for the life of me keep you from having episodes of apnea, which means I was not breathing. And he's like, all else failed, really. He's like, I sat there for 2 hours with my hand over you praying. While I had my hand on you, you breathed. And while I was praying, you were breathing. He's like, but just weeks before that, I decided to walk away from God. He's like, that night, I realized how much we really do need God. And he's like, baby girl, you taught me how to pray. And you brought me back to Jesus. So I was baby girl for the rest of the day, which, I didn't hold that against him at all. He totally earned that. And prayer goes before you no matter what you do. My grandmother also is a praying woman. She is Catholic, which makes prayer interesting with her. I have prayed with her, and, she understands a lot more than, and I need a third hand. Can I borrow a human? I have a little tiny medal in this bag. It's down at the bottom that was from my grandmother. She pinned it to my diaper when I was born. It's a little prayer medal, or it's a necklace medal. And this little medal has traveled with me. I heard it. And those are my baby clothes that can get passed around too if you want. Those are actually 16-inch doll clothes. But this little medal, all right. You know what? Sometimes we're going to figure this out. This little medal, she pinned to my diaper and said a prayer before she let me go to Syracuse. She also followed me to Syracuse with my dad. But this little medal has been carried with me through 15 countries. Yes, I said that right, 15 countries. Your little Wendy's went a long ways. You can pass this around to look at it. It's just a little Catholic prayer medal. But if you want to see it, you're more than welcome. And we also have my baby clothes here that will show you absolutely how small I was. And I wore those until I was about 2 months old. That's a sweater. That is the dress that I went home in. My mom said it was absolutely adorably funny because the dress went to my ankles. Those are the pants to the sweater. The pants I got to wear longer than the rest of it because they were super long. And then we have, those are the socks. My dad said the first time he put them on me, they went up to my hips. I have 2 little hats. One of them is the first hat, which is the smallest. That's the first hat. And the second hat is the one I wore home. I wore it when I was 6 weeks old. Yeah. And if you guys want to see these more in depth later, you're more than welcome to come see them. And then there's just a little bracelet that's just a little bracelet my grandfather bought me with my name on it. It was made by a friend. It's leather. Somehow my little keepsakes all end up in the same bag. And that's just a little register of what I weighed at birth. My mom didn't really write much else in there other than birth weights up till I went home. At the time I went home, I was 4.5 pounds. So now we know why the beginning. God had somebody he wanted to bring back to the fold. Doctors, of course, had a list of she will nevers. She will never walk. She'll never talk. She may never be educated. She'll probably never marry. She'll probably never go very far. You'll have to take care of her for the rest of her life. None of that was true. None of it. At one point, my mom took me to the doctor, and my doctor was doing the usual measurements, which included measuring my head. And he said, Mrs. Hershey, I'm sorry, but I think she might have microcephaly, which is an indicator that you might not have your whole brain. And my mom was like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, well, she might be retarded. And, my mom taught me very well to be quiet when doctors were speaking. And I just couldn't hold my mouth shut. I was 2.5, and I said, Mama, what's retarded? And he looked at me, and she looked at her, and he said, she just proved me wrong. Most 2.5-year-olds cannot say that word. So, there have been steps along the way that did that. I proved a lot wrong. I was able to be educated. I was able to learn how to walk. I don't walk the normal way, but I do walk. Throughout life, I ran into people that weren't really sure how to deal with me. At the age of 4, I went to church with my grandmother quite often. My parents went to church too, but I went with Grandma quite often just because Grandma would invite me, and I'd be like, well, whatever, okay, I'll go with Grandma. One night, we were at a special prayer service at a Catholic church, which I don't know why they did this. I still don't understand the significance of this. But one lady came up to me and my grandma afterward and said, oh, it's a shame she's paying for her parents' sin. Why this woman didn't understand that I could understand her is beyond me, but I did understand her, and I was like, oh, great. I guess I'm God's garbage can. Because that is what it looked like. With all of the stuff I have. And so I questioned everybody. Why on earth would God let this happen? Why? Why? Tell me why. And I would get you just have a special cross to bear. Well, gee, thanks. Jesus already bore the cross. I don't think I needed that. So life went on, and I achieved a lot. I was top third of my high school class. I graduated college. I had, in graduating high school, I was one of the scholars. I was one of the people that was just below the level of honor society. I was very successful compared to what was expected of me, but I still had this question: why? Why? So at one point, I had a study hall teacher, Senor Garcia, who was Spanish. This poor man in an all-white town. He really took a lot of flack from a lot of the students. But he said, Wendy, I know where you'll find your answer. And I said, where? Because I'd like you to show me. He's like, when you go to Potsdam, Jesus will be there. Jesus will answer you. And I looked at him and I said, I think you might be crazy, but thank you. Anyway, so I go to Potsdam State College, and there is a large presence of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship students there, which is a Christian group on campus. Their goal is to save souls. And somehow I was like, they swarmed me. They were all over the place. It's like, how in the world? I didn't even tell them I wanted to know anything from them. They just swarmed me. And there was one girl in particular who kept coming back and giving me Bible verse after Bible verse after Bible verse. And I'm like, all right, Sue Ann, I really respect you, but I feel like if this book is so good, why can't I read it myself? She's like, oh, you'd like a Bible? I said, sure. Not knowing much about the Bible, I started reading at Genesis. And I read Exodus and Leviticus. And I was like, I'm not seeing Jesus in here. Where is this dude? She's like, oh, yeah, you might want to start in the New Testament. And I was like, okay, where? Because the New Testament still got a lot of books in it. And she's like, well, I know that you like to start at the beginnings of things, so start in Matthew. So I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, And I get to John, and by this point, I'm getting headaches every day from trying to read a Bible that's written too small for me. And I'm like, do they make them in bigger print, please? And my friend Vince was like, yeah, we can go get you a Bible that's in bigger print, no problem. So we go to the local Christian bookstore, and they try to sell me, study Bibles and everything at this point. And I'm like, I just want one I can see. So I ended up buying a large print Pew Bible, basically, because I didn't want all of the other stuff, because I know visually impaired, the more stuff you add to a page, the harder it is to work with. So I take my new Bible home that night, and they had their large group meeting before they did their outreach that night, and I decided, well, hey, I'm going to, sit on my bed and start reading this thing and see if it's any better than getting a headache every time I open the book. So I read John chapter 9, verse 3. And it's up on the screen, and I can't find it in my own paperwork. So it's, neither he nor his parents have sinned, but he's here so that the glory of God may be shown in his life. Is that the right one? Sorry, I can't see sideways, and I can't read that one back there, so I'm kind of a little lost. So this verse is where God said, all of that stuff, it's mine. It's for my glory. You're here for a purpose. And I said, cool. Okay, now what? And little did I know that God had his own ministry for me. He, allowed me to be parts of groups of people that wanted me around. That's another issue with disabilities, is sometimes you are ostracized even now. And I went with this group to, we did singing at the nursing home. We did all of this stuff. And a year and a half after I was saved, this is the night I was saved with that verse, I was asked to be a Bible study leader. I co-led with a man named Jerry. And it was amazing. We did prayer and service, which means we would pray for the campus, but we would also do service projects related to our prayers for the campus. We got so attacked by Satan's arrows. It was insane. We went through a lot. We had, there was several people in the group. There was about 12 of us in total that would show up, kind of sporadically throughout the semester. And my friend Patience is also visually impaired, has cerebral palsy, has a number of other health conditions. That particular year, her heart was a real problem. And her husband is, he's a kidney transplant recipient. Nicholas at this time ended up with pneumonia. And pneumonia is really scary when you have one kidney. His fever was so high, they were worried it would kill his kidney. He was hospitalized. We prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And we figured out that he was allergic to his bird. That's what caused the pneumonia. And so we got Nicholas well again, and then Patience got really sick. She has a heart murmur, and she ended up with pneumonia in the fluid sac around her heart. She was put on a transplant list for her heart. And we went through that semester praying for her because she had multiple heart attacks. And we get to the end of the semester, and it was our last large group meeting for InterVarsity. I went with her. This was also the same day that I took my first CPR test, passed it, but it was also the same day that my grandfather died of a massive heart attack. So I'm with Patience at the large group meeting, and she turns gray, and I'm like, Patience, sit down. She had a massive heart attack in my arms. And I remember sitting there praying, please, God, not today. I've had enough. She was healed. She was absolutely healed within her own chest. Her heart was healed. She's still here today. They have 2 children, Aubrey and Cameron. And it was, the healing wasn't absolutely apparent at the time, so we had her taken to the hospital. The doctor said the proteins in your blood are so high, I don't understand how you're still alive. She's one of my miracles. And so she, a couple weeks later, she had to go back to the heart doctor, and she came to my room like running. She's like, look at my hands. And I'm like, what on earth did you do to your hands? They were bright pink. Her hands had never been pink. The normal pink area of your hand, that was never pink. She's like, I'm healed. And I'm like, well, praise God. We've had a rough semester. So she was definitely healed. And so at the end of the semester, I met somebody named Dusty who became a big part of my healing process for all the stuff that happened to me when I was younger. He was the one brave enough to ask questions of everything. That little bag of crap that you have in the corner of your heart? Yeah, he kicked it over. Totally kicked it over. The parts that I haven't told you yet is I was molested as a child multiple times by people that were supposed to be trusted. Not only that, but trying to figure out my self-worth. So Dusty was a catalyst for that. We did at one point date and consider marriage, and that wasn't God's purpose for him. God's purpose was, Wendy, you need to look at your past, you need to see it through my eyes, and you need to go forward. The process of healing is no fun, 0 fun. There were flashbacks, there were screaming fights, there were, lots and lots of prayer and tears. Up to this point, I had never cried a tear. Never. I did not have the ability to cry. You push me now, and I bawl like a baby. So God used him in a powerful way to say, hey, you need to face this. So I faced it as a Christian. It took a lot of work. Thankfully, my pastor was a Christian counselor also, along with being a pastor. I decided to be baptized in the Racket River in October. No, this is northern New York. I was baptized on October 7th, 2002. Did I do this baptism as a profession of faith? Not really. That wasn't my key point. My key point was trusting authority. It was to show that I trusted the authority over me to be the Christian people they said they were. And it was also absolutely facing a fear. I'm terrified of water. I almost drowned at 6 years old because I tried to slide down a waterfall and ended up under it. Yeah, that wasn't smart. So they baptized me in the Racket River. It was like, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this because you guys live in the South where it's warm most of the time. But the water was about 10 degrees warmer than the air. The air that day was 58 degrees. So it felt like you were going into bath water. So when I was under the water, it felt like a giant hug. They pulled me up, and I'm like, oh my. The look on my face in the picture, I don't have the picture because I can't find that one. I know I had it somewhere. But the look on my face was, oh, wow, this is crazy. And it was really quite symbolic to me that God has always got you in a hug. The world is harsh and cold, but God's got you in a hug. So we went forward. I did graduate school, as the pictures showed you. And life goes on, and I did try to do seminary. God kind of threw a curveball in that one. And so eventually I meet my husband while I'm in grad school, and I'm like, God, no, I don't want to be friends with that person, God, no. And God's like, okay. When you get the okay from God, it's not really a okay, well, just wait. And so years later, I meet him again, and because a friend insisted, you have to meet Justin. You've heard of Justin for years, come on. Okay. So I meet Justin, and I decide, well, there's nothing wrong with being friends. We became friends. That particular summer was a rough summer for my family, so I tended to talk to who would listen, not the people who would just give me, oh, God will take care of it. Justin was willing to listen. We became very good friends and discovered eventually from our phone bills that we were on the phone with each other 3 hours a night. Thank God we both had Verizon. So eventually he comes down at Christmas time to help me bake cookies for my family. And I tripped over his feet, fell in his lap, and said, I love you, and I have no idea why. In my mind, I can see God just rolling on his throne, laughing. Like, I gotcha. So, God gave me a very specific verse when I kept asking God, why, what is going on? 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words, but by the behavior of their wives. When they see the purity and reverence of your lives, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that your inner self, the unfading beauty of gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters, if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. My husband is not saved. And I knew the verse about you shall not be unequally yoked. I did not know this verse that I just read you. This was my answer of, yes, go forward with this marriage. We were married July 12th, 2012. And in that, God gave me so much blessing, you have no idea. So I got to be married. That was one thing that was on the she'll never list, even to my own parents. They never said it, but I knew it. And so, he's in grad school because he's 6 years younger than me at the time. So we go through the grad school process, and at the end, he's trying to figure out what job to do. He had, up until 2 months before graduation, he had a guaranteed job with NASA Marshall because he is a rocket scientist. Then the Constellation project was canceled by dear President Obama. And we're like, what do we do now? So we check out SpaceX. Elon Musk said no to my husband's paperwork twice. He would not allow him to be hired. We're like, okay. So I start doing some searching. I'm pretty good at researching anything. So I start doing some research because my husband's degree, his master's is in rocket science, but his undergraduate degree is mechanical and aeronautical engineering. So I was like, okay, well, might as well try using the undergrad one and see what we can find. Just so happens that Pratt & Whitney had a test engineer position open, and they had multiple of them. So it's like, okay, well, let's try this. Even though we don't like Connecticut, we'll, deal. He applied for it, got the job without hardly any question. His boss said that he had one question he wanted answered in the interview, and he tried to make the interview long enough so that Justin thought the interview was long enough that he had the job. Justin was not convinced he had the job, but he got the job. And so we followed engines for 10 years. This is through Canada, through, Germany. And then we get an opportunity to go to France. And Justin's like, he tries to do it nonchalantly. He's like, so what do you think about going to France? I'm like, please, 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 please. Because I had already had a degree in French. And I literally climbed him, because I was so excited. And he's like, I guess we have an answer. So we go to France. I did not realize a lot about France. You get all the flowery, pretty stuff from Paris and, the cultural stuff of music and dance and, the wonderful food. We get on the ground, and I realized the French that I studied was Québécois, which is Canadian French. It is old French, according to people in France. So I'm intimidated to speak, and then we discover 2 weeks later that people of my disability were institutionalized until a generation ago. So there's still people institutionalized in France. So it ramped up the fear. I was afraid of everything. I was afraid to go to the grocery store. I was afraid to walk down the street. Because one of those institutions was right across the street from my apartment, and I tripped over a manhole cover, and somebody tried to carry me into there. Yeah. So I was afraid, and God just kept telling me, just stand. Just stand. And then a lot of that was be who you are and do your thing. Okay. So I realized that I needed language classes to actually understand them, because I knew it was French, but what French, I had no idea. So I took language classes. I got brave enough to go take language classes. And I would just go walk through the markets to listen to them speak. And as I'm taking language classes, I ended up developing somewhat of a following among the homeless population. They loved their Wendy. I don't know why, but they did. And the first time I decided to go out of my apartment by myself before the language classes, I was surrounded by gypsies. Gypsies are not just the flower child people that run around and, are homeless. They can be very dangerous in Europe. I'm standing there in a circle of gypsies going, oh, great. And I looked up and I said, Jesus, help me out. They could not get within arm's length of me. The leader of the group said, you're surrounded by angels. We can't touch you. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Now I'm going home. So I did get brave enough to take language classes. And that, the certificate that I had shown is a testament of how brave God got me to be. He told me to stand. Then he told me to walk, and then he told me to speak. And the speak was not just the language, it was about disability to the people that would listen and to help the people of France. Because there was a large population of blind people and deaf people in the city of Toulouse. So God carried me through my fears. So when I came here almost a year ago, next Sunday is actually a year, the first time I walked in your building and tripped over Kirby's feet. That's actually one of the funny things that God does with me in churches to know that I'm welcome. If I trip over somebody's feet and they still want me there, we're good. I don't know why. So anyway, I've been here about a year. And before we came here, God said for us to come here. I knew it was God, and I knew, okay, I don't know what God has for me in Columbus. We're going to go for it. So, my husband noticed when the first time I walked in here with confidence. He's like, I hadn't seen that in so long. It was shocking. And I told him, I said, after going through the amount of fear and the struggle I went through in France, there wasn't much that would scare me. There really wasn't. I really praise God for the experience in France because I did not know what it was truly like to be a foreigner and to be that fearful. So, as I've been here, I've been trying to figure out how to use the God-given gifts that I have. I do a lot of things. I know how to teach. I know how to sew. I know how to crochet. I know how to knit. I know how to bake. I've been just kind of doing them. And so when it came time for the live nativity, I remember it was me, Heather, Georgia, maybe Jen was in the office, and Nancy and Larry were around. I don't know if they were all in the office at the same time as me. But we were looking through what they wore in previous years, and my spirit said, that isn't good enough for my Lord. I can't let that happen that way. And I'm sitting there going, God, what do you want me to do about it? At this point, I have 2 sewing machines, but I had opposite parts. Like, I had bits and pieces of both of them, but not a complete machine that I had found yet in my stuff that was packed. I said, I'm standing there, and I get a vision of the actual pattern, which I hadn't looked at in like 10 years. And I was like, okay. I said, I have a pattern. I don't know if it's going to work, but I have a pattern. I have materials. And, and then at some point, Heather was there too. Sorry, I forgot about you. Heather said, oh yeah, and I have a degree in fashion design, and my spirit goes, oh, you're kidding me. What do I do with that? So, Jesus is just standing there quietly, and he's like, I asked you to do it. I said, okay, you're asking the visually impaired, half a sewing machine person to do this. Okay, Jesus, let's do it. So I tell them, I say, okay, I will go home and find my stuff. Georgia probably still has pictures of the stuff I found on her phone. And I just, I said, I have this stuff, and I have Justin looking for the sewing machine throttle because it's missing. He found it. So we started up the sewing machine, made sure it ran, and I did the first costume, brought it in, and said, does this work for you guys? Because this is what I have for a vision. They're like, go for it. So I'm assuming at this point, there's other people that know how to sew. Well, God didn't call any of them. So 14 costumes, 2 headpieces later, we got the nativity to work. And was it perfect? No, probably not. If you look at the costumes, you'll see how a visually impaired person sews. They use contrasting thread, because if you stare at the same color thread on the fabric when you have no depth perception, you will give yourself a headache, and a very big one. So what happened in that was God asked me to do something, and I said yes. So, do y'all want miracles? I know the answer of how to get them. Number 1, pray. Pray, 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 pray. Number 2, when God asks you to do something, step up and do it. Step up and do it. Don't be afraid of it, because if God's called you, he's got the path already done. Step up and do it. You know, God doesn't call the people that are perfectly educated and perfectly fit and perfectly anything. He calls the willing. Are you willing? I know that's a hard message, but the reality is it starts with you. You ready to see miracles? You going to pray? And are you going to say, yes, Lord? That's what I have for you today. God bless you all.